Hello, my name is David Bernstein, and I'm President and CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. Welcome to this episode of the CRCast, a bi-monthly webcast on Jewish advocacy and community relations issues affecting the Jewish community relations field. We're really glad to have you all with us today. I'm very excited about this topic. It's a challenging topic, one that many of us are forced to navigate with in our work, and Hillel directors and others as well. Are Jews being excluded from social justice coalitions? That's a question. And if we are, or some are, how do we navigate these complex waters? So we decided it would be great to have with us two excellent practitioners, two of my favorite JCRC directors, one from Cincinnati, Ohio, Jackie, and one from Charlotte, North Carolina, Laurel, two really top professionals, and they've been in the nitty-gritty of this work. So it's an opportunity to hear from them what's working, what's happening, and how to navigate. So really excited that you're both here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So Laura, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So even though I'm in Charlotte and then I'm coming up on just about a year here, I'm actually a Chicagoland native. I was really thrilled to come to a city where the minor league team actually feeds into my favorite baseball team, which, yes, of course, is the Chicago White Sox. Just wanted to say that out there. But throughout my work, even before coming, actually, the reason why I'm here is I only have one person to blame, and that's actually Hannah Rosenthal. When I was a DePaul student.
JCPA, former JCPA CEO.
Yes. She actually did a presentation on the importance of building coalitions between the Jewish community and the larger community, and that really ignited my passions. I did that as a student activist at DePaul University. I did that as a social action chair for my congregation, LGBT congregation, as someone who started a Jewish LGBT support network in Chicago, and as in my work with the Wider Bridge as a Midwest manager, building relationships between the LGBTQ communities of Israel, as well as in North America, and even as a teacher and social worker. So that's really kind of where my heart has been at. And I bring that same passion here as a JCRC director in Charlotte.
Great, great, thank you. Jackie.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I have been in this role as the JCRC director in Cincinnati for the last 2 years. Prior to that, I was the PR manager for our Jewish Federation. We have an in-house JCRC that has its own board, but it is a department within Federation. And prior to that, I spent the better part of a decade as a broadcast news reporter in Washington, D.C., Lexington, Kentucky, and most recently Cincinnati, Ohio. And thinking about the parallels to this work, I also should mention I was raised in an interfaith home and sort of have been at the intersection of communities my whole life personally. But I think that communication is a big piece of what we're talking about today, really the ability to have some of these tough conversations, to raise issues that are uncomfortable, to communicate things effectively to different audiences. And I think that my work in news certainly serves me well in this role as well.
Fantastic, I agree. So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Laurel, you're no stranger to controversy. You are on the front lines of the Chicago Dyke March, which took place about 2 years ago in Chicago. And it resulted in your group being asked to leave. Tell us what happened in the lead up and during that march.
Okay, so you're referring to the situation where I became a very well-documented lesbian Zionist, basically.
Exactly, that's the one.
So yeah, let me first explain what the Dyke March is. It's a march that has been taking place for over 20 years and always takes place the day before the Pride March, with the feeling that this is supposed to be more grassroots, less commercial, more diverse, as well as representation of different gender expressions, minorities, as well as social justice issues that are on display. It's really not a commercial enterprise at all. And so I'd actually marched in this, the Dyke March in this procession for over 10 years. And each year I always brought with me the flag from my LGBT congregation, which had a blue Jewish star in the middle of a rainbow flag. Because for me, this symbolized, again, bridging, connecting two identities I hold dear, and also the two communities that I was very active in. So for 10 years, carried it, not an issue. And then, I guess the next one, the 11th, they threw in a protest for free. I marched with 2 other women who were also carrying the same flag. And there's also other flags at the march, and never before had I had an issue. Some side glares, but no comments. This year was very different. There were Palestinian flags there also, which had been there before. This year there were Palestinian chants saying Free Palestine, especially when we were coming up past certain groups in the procession who saw our flags. And they were also mixed in with chants for other social justice causes, such as no police brutality, and calls against Islamophobia and other things that I would believe in. And so the ones I agreed with, I said something. The ones I didn't, I just, I was quietly and respectful. We get to the end of it, and then all of a sudden, there are some people who want to take pictures, they're excited to see the flags, but then there's this constant onslaught of Dyke March organizers, as well as other participants, who are saying we have to leave or furl up our flag because it's offensive, it's making people unsafe. And I'd never heard this before. And how is this flag making people unsafe? And they kept telling us, well, this flag is a sign of racism and colonialism, and it's a sign of the Israel pride flag. And I said, this is a flag for my congregation. We've carried it for many years, and there's Jews who are, gay all over the world who carry this. And there's even people who have carried this flag in Israel and have been harassed by religious extremists who don't agree with homosexuality. So I said, I don't understand why you're saying this. And then, at one point someone asked me, are you a Zionist? And it's just so sad that in the space that was supposed to and advertised as being so inclusive, again and again, we were being singled out because we had these flags. We were being asked to define our activism. And I said, yes, I'm a Zionist. I believe in Israel's right to exist. I also believe that Israel should exist side by side peacefully next to a Palestinian nation. And the women who were with me also agreed with this. And they told us, no, you can't be a Zionist and believe in a Palestinian state. They actually said to me, no, you can only be one or the other. And this was so heartbreaking. And so eventually, before we left, they asked, who else are you asking to leave besides us and our flags? They said, well, you and the people who are protesting us. And I said, please forgive the vernacular for this, but so you're asking the people who are carrying the flag with the Jewish star and the rainbow pattern on it, and the people who are declaring God hates fags. Those are the people you're kicking out of this inclusive space, and you're pitting us with them. And they said, yeah. And it really hurt also because just years before, I was part of an interfaith coalition to try to pave the way for same-sex marriage in Illinois, which eventually did pass. But now I was being put with the people who had protested those earlier efforts I had done just 2 years before. So.
Yes. So obviously it became a major national story. And you laughed. What are some of the takeaways from that? That we can learn from in the field?
I think there was things that I gained personally involving my work, as well as what I gained from the perspective from the conversation that was taking place. Hang on one second. So in any event, what happened was, sorry, I just got a call from my CEO and I just told her I couldn't talk to her right now. The takeaways were that when something like this happens, you want to, and to both myself and the 2 women who are also being harassed along with me, I don't think is unique, and I think that's why there's so many people on this call. So I think important is to check in, make sure that people are okay that have been directly impacted, to talk to your leadership. And then this was the part that I think the organization I was working for at the time, A Wider Bridge, I think we learned a lot from this. Also make sure to check in with your allies and trust the relationships you're building with people who could potentially be your spokespeople, and be in the rooms that might be more difficult for you to penetrate. Case in point, not long after this happened, A Wider Bridge, we put out a petition condemning the actions of Dyke March, and there was some language in there that our allies had a hard time signing on to, and they said, we wish that you had talked to us, because I've been building a relationship with these people for years, taking them on trips to Israel, showing up for their events, they had come to ours, and we had built this trust, but then we went off and did this. Now, of course, the petition raised awareness about what had taken place, and there were benefits to it, but because we didn't include our allies in those conversations, they couldn't really come out and make public statements about what Dyke March had done. Instead, what they did the best they could, which we still appreciated. They talked to their constituents in private gatherings and quietly kept other people, other groups from getting into the fray of what took place within Dyke March, and just kind of separated from the issue. So I would say that when something like this happens, know who your allies are and get their feedback and work with them on it, because then your message is even stronger when they're working in concert with you rather than having to, do their own thing.
Right. I remember at the time that the Human Rights Campaign, which is LGBTQ rights organization that considers itself the largest civil rights organization in America, came out in support of you, right? And
Yes.
and they didn't back down at all from those accusations. So it shows that
there were some great in national and international organizations that spoke up. I guess what I'm talking about is the people and the LGBT organizations I work directly with in Chicago. Now, that's not to say the leaders themselves didn't reach out to me immediately to see, how I was doing, how could they be supportive, and they were wonderful in that. But as far as them within their leadership roles making a public statement on the local level to their local partners, they couldn't really do that in public once our once our petition went public with the wording that was decided upon.
Got it. So I'm going to pose a question to both of you. Maybe I'll start with you, Jackie. Are Jewish groups, are JCRCs and others being excluded from social justice coalitions? Are we being asked to check our Zionism at the door?
So this sounds like a gotcha question from back in my journalism days, but I'm going to attempt to answer it anyway. No, I appreciate the question. I think it's a good question. And I think it's a hard one to answer. I mean, I would be willing to say that it's certainly gotten much more uncomfortable to be a Jew in a lot of these spaces. I don't necessarily think that there is an ironclad, welded shut door. I don't think that people are asking folks who bring chairs to tables where there isn't an extra chair for a Zionist, that people are saying there's no room at the table for the chair you brought. That being said, I think some people are having to bring chairs, and I think it's getting uncomfortable. We had the silver lining, I think, and really the transformative nature of the stories, like this terribly painful experience that Laurel had to go through. And recently, we had over Memorial Day weekend, we had a KKK rally in Dayton. Same kind of thing happened where there was an Israeli flag that was destroyed among the counter protesters to the KKK. And in some ways, while these things are painful, and I think they're indicative of an environment that's shifting and they're uncomfortable in the moment, they can be transformative when we are helping well-intended folks on the progressive left understand what we're talking about, right? So like this story that, what happened to Laurel, I have used that in so many conversations with progressive, potential allies to say, let me give you a feel for what this looks like on the left. And they don't have anything to say back. They're like speechless about how this could happen. The same thing with what happened in Dayton, the fact that there's this inclusive space that's exclusive, and the fact that there's, criticism of Israeli policy and government that's sort of being, cast upon Jewish people all across the world, regardless of affiliation or support for government policy in Israel or not. So I think it's been some of these flashpoint painful times have been transformative in terms of Jewish advocacy to help people understand just how different and sort of outrageous this is. And we always talk about how this is a circle, right? And the not to make moral equivalencies, but certainly the further we get from the center, the more the extremes start to look like each other. And thinking about Dayton, like where was it comfortable for Jews to stand, right? Certainly, to your point, Laurel, about the same people who were protesting your efforts to be more inclusive, you were cast out with them, so you're not going to stand with them. But you're not welcome in this space of inclusivity. I think is particularly palatable. The other thing that I've realized in conversations with allies on this, in fact, I just had one this morning with our local LGBTQ activist, sort of support activist organization called Lighthouse Youth Services in Cincinnati. I shared this story, and she said back to me, I was talking about living a sort of Jewish advocacy in this moment, and this transformative conversation we were privileged to witness at JCPA's national conference this year with April Baskin and Abby Stein. And sort of, you know, for those on the call who don't know who these amazing women are, they're tasked with representing sort of the Jewish voice and the Jewish constituency in the National Women's March. And they've been part of a lot of very challenging conversations along the way over the years, certainly this past year. And I was sharing with this local LGBTQ advocate the conversation that they had, which was, you know, this discomfort that Jews are feeling in this moment for white, cisgender, heterosexual Jews who grew up as, you know, in sort of a secular way in America. You know, this is a moment where we really need to take a lead from minority factions within our own community, right? And April and Abby, you know, both said this so articulately that sort of welcome to the party of being a minority. This is what it's like. We have to, if I walked away from every table where there was a hint of racism or there was a hint of sexism or there was a hint of, you know, discrimination against LGBTQ people, I would never sit at any tables. And so I think it's a matter of like recalibrating a little bit our barometer and knowing when to show up with the chair. And to your point, David, the condemn and marginalize tactics and the educate and engage. I think there's a lot of educating and engaging that can be done on this. And stories like what happened to Laurel and what happened in Dayton 2 weekends ago are transformative in some of those conversations.
Yes. By the way, anybody who would like to ask questions, we've started to get them in. Please type them into the question box and we'll do our best to get to it. Let me start with actually one of the question, it's a comment really from a colleague. At the same time as these events, we're also seeing Jewish progressive activism at incredibly high level, perhaps the highest since the civil rights movements around issues like immigration, and other domestic issues that are particularly impacting communities of color. Do you agree with that? Are you seeing more energy being placed by Jewish activists at these progressive tables?
Sure. I have to answer this one because I have to use the best cliche ever. It's not that Jews are suddenly becoming more active. It's just that we're finally coming out of the closet about it. That was a gay joke. Anyway, thank you. Digital delay with that one. Let me try that again. Jews are coming out of the closet about it. Right. And I think some of it was starting similar with what you see in Zionists, with the work that they're doing, letting people know that there are people who are progressive and identify as Zionists, and they're also here with the issues that they care about because they don't see these as a conflict, caring about Israel. Again, the only democratic country in the Middle East. I know there's different things we'd like to see displayed there, and we all have different opinions on that because, of course, you know, Jewish people, Jewish state, what do you expect? But that's still the case, and just because I believe in Israel's right to exist doesn't mean that there's other issues that I care about. These are all a contradiction. So I think that people, and what was really great, what I meant to say before, after what happened with the Dyke March controversy, what I drew a lot of strength from was the conversations that came out where people said, yes, you know something, I am in these spaces, and I do feel like I have to choose my identity, and I don't want to do that anymore, and let's really talk about inclusion, intersectionality, seeing people for their whole selves, not just cherry picking the parts that fit with certain narratives. And I should say that itself, you know, is another conversation. That's not really what intersectionality is. I mean, in situations where intersectionality is being weaponized, where people say, okay, if you have this one thing, you can't be part of this group. That's not even what the theory is about, but I'll digress on that later.
I want to push on that a little bit. Laura, I want to push on that for 1 second because I think it's an important distinction, and I'm wondering if you all agree that we're seeing really two distinct forms of intersectionality, what I would call an inclusionary form, which wants to sort of widen the scope of human empathy and bring in more people and have more people fighting the good fight for society and for equality, and a more exclusionary form, which is more of a zero-sum game. Either you agree with us on every single issue and you've accepted the canon on who's oppressed and who's not, and or you can't really be part of our club. Do you agree that there's these two distinct forms now, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, it's always more complicated. But I'm going to say that intersectionality in and of itself, the theory is looking at someone's multiple identities and how that affects their level of privilege and their level of restrictions or oppression. So again, as a woman, I'm going to make less than a man. Thanks for that, Dave, by the way. I'm going to make less than a man, unfortunately, in most cases, but because by European descent and other advantages, I will probably make more than someone who of color who's also female, and those are things. So there's the theory of looking at how is our society set up and how can we make it work differently. There are people who try to say intersectionality is a way to use community organizing. It gets really messy when you do that. But what you do see, maybe Jackie can talk more about this, especially with her media expertise, people who want to use intersectionality as a weaponizing soundbite to say, okay, you're either on this line or that line, and that's it.
I think that what we're seeing with intersectionality, and David, what you've hit on is a trend that we're seeing about just about everything, which is like perversions of frameworks and institutions that are really supposed to. There was a phenomenal article, I think, written in the wake of what happened in Chicago about it's time for intersectionality to include the Jews. And I mean, talk about intersectional identity, right? Really, so many in the Jewish community, and this is where I think that in some ways we're a little bit behind in elevating our own communities within communities. Like we, the organized Jewish community, have to do a better job with that. The other thing I just want to pivot back to your question about are Jews, or I think it was a comment made about Jews in activist spaces or in some of these other causes. I think that's very, very true. What I fear, what I don't want to see happen is that we leave our Jewishness behind when we're there. And so I think that.
How about our Zionism?
So I think it's more than Zionism. I think it's Jewishness. I think there's a Zionist piece to it for sure. In fact, I was recently on a panel with the Central Conference of American Rabbis, at the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which was recently hosted in Cincinnati, about intersectionality. And at first we were talking about Zionism and this sort of like the space on Israel. And actually we changed the name of the panel to include just sort of intersectionality in general and the complications of being a Jew taking our place at some of these progressive tables in this moment. Because I think it's much more than Israel. For instance, we've had a number of conversations in our community trying to, I want to say, rebuild bridges and alliances between Black and Jewish communities. And, I was sitting down, I'll never forget this, with a prominent Black minister in town who looked at me and just said, so I'm confused. Are we talking about relationships between Blacks and whites or Jews and Christians? We're talking about Jews and African Americans. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. But the idea that, that was an identity that was hard for them to see or hard for them to link. And so I think, this notion, and I want to give credit where credit's due to my friend Rory Pickernese in, thank you, St. Louis. I don't know if she's listening or not, but what she had to say about privilege, power, and trauma, and the fact that people, we Jews are a bit of an enigma in this space because, and I'm speaking again primarily about white Jews, because I think it applies differently to Jews of color certainly, but the privilege and the power that comes with being white in America, but also having this trauma as a piece of that and a piece of our identity and having to kind of explain that to people. And again, the privilege that we've had to not have to explain that until now. Like, I think this is sort of a reawakening that a lot of, again, white, I'm talking primarily white, heterosexual, cisgender Jews are waking up to the fact that, like, just being a Jew carries a certain amount of minority status with it, and how do we operate in that? How do we leave space for people who really just need some more education and some more exposure and don't understand? And how do we know when it's something more than that and we need to employ a different kind of tactic?
So we started framing this conversation as a reactive challenge. There was the Chicago Dyke March, and what do you do about it, and how do you make sure that you manage that crisis well? But there's also a proactive element here. How do we make sure we're at the tables that we need to be at? My favorite phrase is, either you're at the table or you're lunch. How do we make sure we're not lunch? How do we make sure we're present and allowed to be in where we need to be?
I think it's all about relationships. I mean, I think you have to just double down on relationship pieces, and you have to start where you have commonality. I think you have to use stories that are really illustrative and hard to deny to help people understand who may not, you know, and I think we have to seize on this moment to actually have down here, own our privilege and educate about it in inter-community spaces, so in Jewish spaces, and to own our minority status and educate about it in intra-community spaces. And, you know, we recently hosted the summit in Cincinnati where we really talked about anti-Semitism and hatred in general, and we were very intentional and inclusive about trying to populate panels to address all forms of hatred, but we had keynotes that really spoke specifically about anti-Semitism. I think that we are, you know, as challenging as this moment is for American Jews in the progressive intersectional space, I think we do have an opportunity to help others in the broader community understand our intersectional identity, who we are, what the challenges are of being a Jew in 2019. And you know, we can think proactively in terms of programming and relationship building about ways that we can do that.
So, yeah, absolutely. So to dovetail on that, there's an initiative that we've recently launched here in Charlotte called the Progressive Israel Engagement. We call it PI for short. PI is pretty big in the South, I'm learning. So what this is doing is we are actually recruiting people who are already active in progressive circles. And again, going back to what I said before with progressive Jews coming out of the closet, we're here. It's just whenever people talk about Israel, we always say the same things in our heads. I don't know enough. I don't want to say anything. This is really unpleasant. I don't want to get into this space. You know, again, going back to the Dyke March, people say this is a safe space. So, and they use that as an argument to shut down the conversation. In the conversations that followed, there was a really great rabbi in Chicago, Rabbi Shoshana Conover, very inspirational leader, who taught me the phrase brave space, that we know that we need to have this conversation, understanding that it's uncomfortable, but this is more important than the comfortable silence. We can truly see one another, understand where each other is coming from. So what we're doing is we're taking Jews who are already active in progressive spaces, and we're giving them the tools to actually have giving them basic background information, but then also teaching them the importance of relational one-on-one meetings, how to have those, and that the people that they're meeting with to have these discussions, it's not that we're going to have the discussion and go. We want them to find out certain information as far as what are people's views on Israel, and then use that as a way of making impactful programs, messaging, and also having people who would want to learn more and find out more about the Jewish community. Here in Charlotte, we are facing issues in regards to old school anti-Semitism, where I've had already 12 cases come across my desk, everything from middle school to college, involving swastikas, Nazi propaganda, kids being bullied, and just horrible things happening. And so finding ways to address that, but then also we have on our college campuses as well as in our interfaith spaces, and even within our political parties, this entrenchment of trying to delegitimize Israel. And so to Jackie's point, bringing that together as far as the whole Jewish identity, and also creating a space where it's not just giving people talking points, but the tools to have a conversation with people and know that if someone has a question, they know someone they can talk to or can get them resources. Because while we want to focus on the more extreme people, and there are, I will disagree slightly with Jackie, there are people who will close the door on Jews who identify as Zionists. Those are usually, unfortunately, more extreme fringe. That's not the overall majority. And I think, if anything, the survey that just came out from J Street just proves that point. That's not the overall majority. And to focus our efforts on the middle, who don't really know that much, might be too scared to even say something, let them know that you're someone they can come to speak with. And through these stories that you're sharing, these shared narratives, these shared values, where they can see that I believe in Israel, and here's the kind of Israeli values organizations I support, and they see that kinship, then you're building more of a connection, a better understanding of who I am and what it means to be a Zionist, and seeing that it doesn't impede our ability to work together here. I'll share one more short story. I met with a prominent African-American minister here, and we're doing a relationship building, and I say that I'm a Zionist, and he says, in my eyes, when you say Zionism, I equate that with Nazism. Did not see the conversation going there. And so I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, I see whenever you have any form of nationalism, it's going to go to the extreme. And I say, okay, I understand where you're coming from on that, and I appreciate you sharing it. I will still identify as a Zionist because I want to challenge that view you have of what a Zionist is and looks like. And we still have conversations with each other, and that was a really powerful moment. But also, again, we gained so much respect for one another, understanding of one another, as far as where our views are formed, by having that brave conversation.
Right. You didn't cut off relations summarily with him. You went through that education engagement process so that you could bring him a bit closer to you, and you could humanize yourself and the cause in his eyes, which I think is very powerful. We're running out of time here, but I'm going to ask the two of you to write up your programs for our field. Pi sounds fascinating and really important, and I'm sure your colleagues, I'm actually getting questions about it. Can't we read about more? And Jackie, many of us know about that incredible summit on anti-Semitism you held, but and I know you have written it up. We'd love to share both of these programs and think that they're fantastic examples of how great community relations can be and how we can more effectively navigate the treacherous waters of the ideologically charged communities we're in right now. So thank you both of you. Please stay tuned for other CRcasts. We're going to be holding them throughout the summer, and we'll hope you join us. Thanks, and have a great week.
Thank you again for this opportunity and for all the great work all of you out there do.
Seconded.